Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. According to UNICEF, female genital mutilation, FGM, affects more than 200 million women worldwide. The Toronto Star has noted that Canadian girls are being taken abroad to undergo FGM. Let's explore this issue from the Islamic lens. Is this a practice that is permissible in Islam? Let's get Dr. Shabir Ali's thoughts on this issue. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're talking about a controversial topic, and I want to get the Islamic perspective on it. Is FGM permissible in Islam?
Well, most things one can say, like strictly from a religious point of view, before we get into the legalities now, one can say that unless there is a clear prohibition, then a thing is generally permissible. But there may not be a clear and specific prohibition with regard to one specific thing, but there's the general prohibition of harmful things. So if something is harmful either to yourself or someone else, then that would start to lean on the prohibited side, depending on the extent and the intensity of the harm.
So does the Quran say anything about FGM?
The Quran doesn't say anything about circumcision at all, whether for male or female circumcision. Male circumcision, of course, is well established in Muslim traditions and goes back all the way to Abraham in the Bible, because Abraham was commanded to circumcise himself and his son and all of the males in his family at the time, so some 1800 BC. And that became a lasting covenant for God's people to be circumcised, for the males to be. And when the Muslims came on the scene, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, generally followed along with Jewish practice, unless there was something specifically revealed to him that would be contrary to that practice. And so circumcision also was, male circumcision that is, maintained among Muslims with this good historical and scriptural basis. But nothing in the Quran specifically says anything about circumcision, whether for males or female.
So we started talking about the Prophet. What about, do we know from the time of the Prophet if he dealt with any cases or situations when it came to the question of female circumcision?
Before answering this question, we have to be aware that the reports about what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said and did or witnessed outside of what is mentioned in the Quran, it comes from what we know from hadith books. And the hadith books in their present form were written a couple of hundred years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The earliest famous collection of hadith is that by Imam Malik, called the Muwatta. And Imam Malik died in the year 179 of the Hijrah, so this was already 180 some years after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away. You could say 869 years after the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. Imam Bukhari, whose collection is most famous and known to be most authentic among the lot, died in the year 256, so this is already 246 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. A couple of hundred years, and the hadiths were being transmitted by word of mouth from one person to another. Naturally, mistakes could occur. So what do we do with the vast collections of narratives about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? We weigh them and we sift them to determine the wheat from the chaff. What did he actually say, and what could be due to a mistake? Imam Bukhari did much of this weighing and sifting, and so his hadiths are generally thought to be the most authentic. But in Bukhari, there is no mention that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, saw the circumcision being done and that he said something about this, female circumcision,
females,
that
yeah.
is. But in the collection of Abu Dawood, which is of a lesser authenticity, generally, there is a hadith which a modern scholar has actually deemed to be authentic, but this is not what is classically known. The classical position is that the hadiths of Abu Dawood are not of that great authenticity, and this particular one itself has been questioned by some other scholars. The hadith basically says that the Prophet, peace be upon him, knew of a woman who was performing circumcision on girls, but he called her and he said to her that if you do it, then do not cut deeply. So that would be taken by some to mean that he sanctioned the female circumcision so long as it is not done too deeply. But then what is meant by too deeply? Because this now is a relative term. And we know that people have gone to great extremes with this to raise alarm bells, and the term female genital mutilation describes accurately much of what is being done in the world in connection with this kind of ruling. So one needs to then draw a line somewhere and go back and ask, what did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually say? Did he really say this? Is this a dependable narrative based on which we might derive a ruling? Or is this more of a traditional practice that people have been doing for generations, even before Islam? And then the Prophet, peace be upon him, just simply left that alone, but tried to limit the harms by saying, do not cut too deeply.
So does that mean when he was saying do not cut too deeply that there are levels of cutting that people have practiced in the past?
What is known from a fact sheet put out by the United Nations and could be found on the website is that there are various practices. One practice might be similar to male circumcision, whereas in male circumcision it is the prepuce that is cut around and removed, and it does not cause any harm to the male. The closest to this would be that over the clitoris there is a covering which is also called the prepuce, and that could that's one level of cutting, just removing that, but not the clitoris itself. Coming to the clitoris, one practice would remove part of it, and some practices would remove all of it. Which is alarming because, especially alarming, we should say, because that is the center for satisfaction in the female. But some practices go even beyond this, and in some cultures the labia minora is also removed. I say all of this with due respect for the nature of our show and also for the variety of our audiences, and also with due respect to you as our host. But sensitive and intimate as these details are, they need to be discussed in order for us to be fully aware of what the problem is. Because often when Muslims hear these discussions about FGM, they're thinking that somebody else out there is out to find fault with our faith and to attack the basic things in what we believe, the basic things of what we believe. But we need to understand that there is a problem. So with the removal of the labia minora comes also the question of infibulation. What is done then is that the remaining parts are sutured together so that they even fuse, and this leaves only a tiny opening for the passage of urine and menstrual blood. And more to the point, sometimes part of the labia majora is also removed, and so when this is stitched together, it results in a fusing because of the scar tissue, fusing of the parts. And then if when a woman gets married and her marriage is to be consummated, this leads to the noticeable problem on the part of the groom, because sometimes it is mentioned in some cultures that the groom would say that, it's been trying for a month and you could not penetrate. And then a more major problem occurs when the woman is to give birth, because in that case, the fused tissue have to be separated. And then after birth, sometimes it's re-infibulated one more time. So this obviously is a great deal of harm that has resulted from what initially might have been, if at all it was sanctioned by the Prophet, peace be upon him, a very minor cut has turned out to be something that in some societies is very major. And the question is, how do we deal with this major harm?
So what would you say now, in light of all of the issues that you've raised, and we know these are apparent as well and various reports in the media as well, what's your, as a Muslim, is this something, that people might say, well, he said not deep, so maybe there are different levels. What would you say in light of FGM and the issues that it creates? Is it something that Muslims should practice and support, or is it something that's off bounds?
I've written a longer article about this, which I hope will be posted on the Quran Speaks website. But short of that, the brief answer to this is that we need to take a firm stance and say that to prohibit all of this harm, we need to say that no cutting at all whatsoever. In any case, it's against the law in Canada to perform any circumcision on females, and Muslims should abide by that law. Not because it's invented by somebody else, that means we're going to reject it. This should be our own law that says that in the face of this harm, even something that would have been permissible can now become impermissible within our sacred law because of the harm that ensues from it. Or on the other hand, we might say that if this permissible thing, by practicing it, a lot of harm becomes associated along with it, then too the permissible thing can be left alone, without even considering it to be impermissible, just in order to take a firm position against the harms that are out there. So this, I believe, to be the position that Muslims should take, and it removes that kind of quandary in the minds of some Muslims who might be following some ancient scholarship, thinking that, okay, this is part of our faith, and then we must, if it's illegal in Canada, we must go find some place or some circumstance or do it on the sly because it's part of our faith. No, it's not a requirement in our faith. First of all, it's not mentioned in any verse of the Quran. The hadiths that mention this are either inauthentic or unclear. And it is so unclear that, in fact, in the Hanafi school, this is not even a recommendation. The most I find in the Hanafi books is that they say that circumcision is a sunnah for men and an honor for women. But saying that it's an honor for women does not place it in any of the categories of Islamic jurisprudence, which to recommend a thing at least it's called mustahab or desirable. And then higher than that, it is sunnah. But this is saying just like it's an honor for women. But that refers then to societal norms and practices rather than to say that this is a religious ruling. So by Muslims omitting this, they would not be omitting anything that is a requirement in our faith. And at the same time, they will be standing up for justice for women in general and for girls more particularly.
A holistic discussion as always. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.